2 summers ago, I walked into a music store downtown. I'd recently lost a friend due to unseen circumstances. He was killed tragically in an accident, and I was upset and searching for a distraction from life. I was also searching for meaning in life. Everything in my life at that point seemed to be meaningless. We were born to die, in my opinion. That's when I picked up my banjo, Buford. Through practice and playing Buford, it gave me efficacy, space, and time to think about who I was, who I wanted to be, and what mattered most. It also gave me time to think about how my story and Buford's story were alike. I realized that who I was at that point in my life was the description that others said I was. If they thought I was smart or funny or goofy or talented, then in my mind I was. And my identity was so grounded in other people's opinions of me that when their opinions changed or when those people died, I became a changed person or I became silent. I also realized that as I perceived my banjo, that I too was like a banjo. I was played like an instrument to sound a certain way. Whatever people or forces that played me, that was how I sounded. And sometimes that sound wasn't up to me. The way I sounded was who I thought I was, and that became the way my story sounded. I also realized that whatever context I was in, like a banjo, made me sound different. Just like the banjo story was one in different contexts, from Africa to America, being played in African music, minstrel shows, jazz and bluegrass, I would be played in different contexts as well. And I realized at this time that I didn't want that context or genre I was in to define me anymore. So I decided that I needed to create my own narrative. I realized that my narrative was largely misunderstood, and just like mine was, the banjo's was. Therefore, just as my narrative needs to be told to be understood, so I will tell the banjo story because it must be understood for what it actually is. Not what other people say it is, but what it actually is. The banjo story is actually misunderstood in America. The banjo first started in Africa in the 13th century. Certain musicologists suggest that the banjo was made out of whatever material was available to African tribes. Because the banjo could be made out of a variety of wood, strings, and gourds, the instrument had no consistent form. Because the instrument was named after the material used, the banjo had a variety of names like Zalam, Talakamba, and Ekontine. Ekontine is actually being used in the music being played right now. Musicologists further suggest that the banjo was significant in African culture. It was central to growing up into adulthood, their religion, dances, and heritage. It was a heritage instrument to these tribes because the tools and methods they used were different in every tribe, which signified each tribe distinctly. In fact, the banjo in its earliest forms was so important to these people that when they were taken into slavery, the banjo came with them. The banjo traveled from Africa to the Caribbean to America in the 17th and 18th centuries. In this time, the banjo's design stayed similar to what it was in Africa. The slaves at this time used wood, gourds, and string that was round to make their instruments still. The instrument stayed a central part in the culture of the people. It was used like in the photo for dances after long days working in the field. However, in 1830, just after the Jim Crow laws passed, there was a rise in America of what were called minstrel shows. And these satirical comedy shows, which made fun of African Americans using black painted faces, changed the banjo forever. The central part of these satiric comedy shows was the use of the banjo for music. A popular banjo player at the time who participated in minstrel shows was named Joel Walker Sweeney. He became the head figure of a white movement that tried to make the banjo fit what he and they saw as a higher, more sophisticated social class. This movement accomplished this by exclusively making the banjo out of wood for their shows. This essentially whitewashed the banjo's history by making it colorless. Some people went as far as to say Joel Walker Sweeney invented the banjo. Because of this change in culture, the banjo changed design in the 19th century. It essentially became the instrument we recognize it as today. The banjo moved from New York minstrel shows, which began dying out, to southern New Orleans jazz, in which the instrument never seemed to fit, to bluegrass music in the Appalachian Mountains, the genre in which the banjo seems to be played mostly today. The reason the banjo is most recognized in bluegrass today is because that is the genre in which the heritage and story of the instrument's sound comes out best in. I find it ironic that their heritage found in the banjo comes from this earlier group of African people. It is ironic that people in America rely on a narrative for meaning and heritage that is not true. In fact, it is a narrative that was changed and told to sound different, to fit people's desires and needs. This is why I love the story of the banjo. Why the banjo is like me is because its genres sounded different in different contexts across history, like I felt I tried to do before I realized this. The context demanded that I sound smart, then I did. The context demanded that I sound funny, then I would. So both Buford and I know what it feels like to sound different according to people's uses. Also, how my story is like the banjo's is because the banjo story that is recognized as today in America is not what it truly is. My story is like that too. Some may say my story sounds like one filled with soft, quiet depression. However, I choose to say mine sounds upbeat and filled with joy, and that's what it truly is. How do we make us and our stories sound how we want them to? It is by choosing to. We aren't inanimate objects, we are people with agency. Some people try to force us to sound a certain way in situations according to their uses, whether intentionally or not. We choose to sound how we want to. We also choose to tell our stories the way we want them to sound. If we want it to sound like soft, quiet, decrescendos or loud crescendos, then we choose to. Me, I choose to make mine sound loud, obnoxious, with an upbeat tempo. That's how I make my banjo Buford sound like too.